Do you accept that the government should have appreciated sooner than it did that the NHS would be overwhelmed, which of course was the trigger for the decision to impose the national lockdown and the measures the week before?
I think I'd go further. I would accept that in almost all of these cases, we should have realised earlier.
Had the risk to the NHS been appreciated sooner, it would have been open to the government, would it not, to introduce the measures that it did introduce on the 16th of March at an earlier stage when the incidence of virus was lower, correct?
Yes, that wasn't the scientific advice, of course, but of course, you're right, the government could have done so.
And had it done so, although we will never know, there must therefore remain the possibility that those measures, if introduced earlier, would have avoided the need for the national lockdown.
It's possible, but I think, Mr. Keith, what I would recommend there is that we really should ask, I don't know whether the inquiry is intending to do so, milady, but we would need really deep academic research to make those judgments around the counterfactuals. I think it's a reasonable supposition. I've read a lot of the other witness statements. I don't know whether it would have been, I'm highly sceptical that it would have been possible to avoid the lockdown altogether. It might well have been possible for it to have been less prolonged. Of course, what we don't know is the effect on the overall number of deaths. But my presumption, having read other witness statements, it's not something which I've ever felt qualified to judge independently, is that earlier would have been better.
And we're not looking for your epidemiological answer. The question presumes that there will only ever be the possibility and that it can never be known. But as the Cabinet Secretary at that time, as a person intimately involved in these momentous decisions, how could you not have a view as to whether or not, if those earlier steps had been taken earlier, a different course might have been open to the government?
As I've said, I agree. I've looked at the other statements. All I'm trying to do is suggest I don't want to try and impose a judgment now as a non-expert on the decisions we took at the time. The decisions that the government took at the time were based on the scientific advice they were getting. Clearly, and you've heard this from people much more expert than I, had those decisions been taken earlier, then particularly given we didn't know how fast the disease was moving, it would have had a greater impact on that accelerating curve earlier, and one presumes a positive effect on lockdown, casualties, etc. Whether we would have been able to avoid a lockdown, which I think was the initial premise of your question, I'm much more sceptical about that. I think it's more likely to have been about its duration.